So good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Décary-Hétu. I am an associate professor at the School of Criminology of the Université de Montréal, and I'm also honored to be the chair of the Division of Cybercrime of the American Society of Criminology. And our division's goal is really to promote cybercrime research, and we have a lot of very, very talented researchers who are part of this division, and we have three of them with us today. So I'm extremely happy to have Ting, Chua, Thomas Dearden, as well as Cassandra Drodge with us. The goal for the next hour is to give you about three presentations from three different areas related to cybercrime, and then we'll have an open discussion, and I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of comments and great things to say about the presentations, and I'm sure we're going to have very good exchanges at the end of this hour. If you're attending the American Society of Criminology in November, it's going to be in Washington, D.C., or if you're interested in cybercrime research, I do invite you to find us and register and become a member of the division. It's very cheap and you get a lot of great activities, lots of great perks, so please look it up and join us. Now, though, we have our first presentation with Ting Chua. And the presentation is going to be about an examination of scam rap lyrics, a very trendy topic right now. So Ting, if you want to share your slides, if you have, I believe you have some, and we'll let you take it away.
Hi. So today I'm going to talk about examination of scam rap lyrics, which is a project I've been working with Dr. DeQueen based in St. Houston State University, and I'm currently based at the University of Tulsa. So what is scam rap? Pretty much it is a subgenre of rap that focuses on fraud and cybercrime and financial scam. And it kind of started emerging in the 2010s to nowadays. There are still artists actively producing scam rap. And we can see that there is significance in studying this, especially when we look at other subgenre of raps and how that has been studied in terms of crime and its relations with law enforcement, the portrayal of criminal behavior such as drug dealing and police brutality. So that's kind of what got us interested in looking at this new category of scam rap and how that affects, media perception with scam. And also importantly, another reason for doing so is their increasingly influence of this music on various social media platforms. And we have seen several examples of fraud kind of going viral on platforms such as TikTok, and then followers, especially younger users, sometimes will follow it. So there's importance in understanding the impact of the scam rap and how they relate to real crime offline fraud behavior. And in some cases, there are crossover of scam rap artists with real world cases where some of them have been arrested or investigated for actually committing the fraud that they were rapping about. So part of this, the theoretical framework for this line of work is, through media effects theory, where we're seeing whether social learning theory can occur through learning or exposures to criminal behaviors in music, and how crime sometimes can be seen as a creative or performative act. But at the same time, we're going to look at it at a larger backdrop against economic stress, especially around the 2010s in the context of global pandemic, as well as how scam rap is seen as a way to promote a lifestyle that's different than gangster rap from the earlier days. So one of the major research questions that we have is, what exactly is this depicted in the scam rap songs? Are they very much instructional, or is it more about the lifestyle associated with scamming? So this is an ongoing project. Currently, we have about 165 songs from 31 female artists and 134 male artists. So it's a very male-dominated industry. The song ranges from 2012 to 2025. And here are some of the eligibility criteria. So they have to depict some form of fraud. They have to be available online, and the song have to be in English because there are non-English scam rap artists out there. So at this point, we went through a multi-stage data collection to identify all the scam rap songs, because scam rap artists, what they do is they will produce songs that are not necessarily scam focused as well. So we had to go through different stages of sampling to actually collect a song. For this presentation, we're doing a random sample of songs, which is about 22. So we have about 6 songs by female artists and then 16 songs by male artists for this presentation. Through a deductive codes, we have 69 codes that kind of capture different aspects of fraud, the type of content that they were talking about, method, any sort of consequences and risks that would have discussed or that would appear in the songs. But at the same time, while we're coding, we're also developing our own codes, which resulted in the 6 inductive codes. This is most likely going to change as well as we start coding other songs. But based on the preliminary round of analysis, we're going to look at what exactly is presented in these songs. And from what we've seen, we do see very kind of 2 types of depictions. So there are very instructional content where it is like a step-by-step guidelines on what to do. And then at the other end, you have the very flaunting style of music where they're just talking about how scam allowed them to achieve a certain certain lifestyle and status. The most common types of fraud depicted or referenced in the lyrics are credit card fraud, bank and check fraud, and consumer fraud. There are some references to loan fraud like PPP loans, but they're still in the minority compared to the other 3. And oftentimes there's people that there's pride in identifying themselves as scammers. So there's some general scam discussion. I will be showing some of the lyrics here to kind of highlight what I meant when they say this instructional versus lifestyle. And I apologize for some of the lyrics can be a bit quite straightforward or it can be offending. But so you can see in here, they talk about going to a carding site, going to the dumb section, and even how to select one and then to use a proxy server or use public connections. So they talk about not only where to find a data set, but also how to protect yourself in that sense. And there's also some discussion about money laundering. So surprisingly, some of these songs can be very specific when it comes to how to execute some of these scam and fraud. Right, and then here we have another one, avoiding detection. You have to use VPN, you have to use proxy server, how to do track 1, track 2, which, I mean, might be a bit outdated by now, but still is. And from that song, the title is actually called How to Write a Dumb. So it's still very instructional in that sense. The next one is also telling people how to actually use the card in the store. So if you have like a stolen credit card you're trying to use in store, what you should do to not trigger any sort of detection by the shops. So the key takeaways here is that scam rap reflects, a digital shift in crime compared to, gangster rap in the past, where it's more about traditional street crimes. And as a sense with, social media platforms and things, we are very much interested to see how this sort of content would have an impact on criminal behaviors, and also just how it is now utilized in some legal cases where they are being used for investigation. So here are my contact information. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. That's very interesting. Maybe I can ask you just one question, just as Thomas is getting prepared with his own presentation. But one thing that we've seen, at least here in Quebec and Canada, is the link between violence and these online frauds. And we had this thing called COVID, and we had a lot of government programs, and we had the PCU here in Canada, and reading the chats between the fraudsters, it seemed to be the best thing that's ever happened. Just because you could easily get $12,000 from the government with very little steps. It was very easy to get, and there was quite a few rappers were going on about it. And everyone's pretty sad that the PCU was done because it was just the best cash machine ever. And it is believed, few studies that have really looked seriously into this, but it's believed that all this inflow is very easy money got these gangs who do a lot of raps and songs online to buy guns just because they had so much money, and this really increased the number of gun violence, gun discharges, and the problem with firearms here, whereas it really wasn't never a big problem. It was always contained because guns in Canada were relatively difficult to get. So I don't know if that's something that you can talk about a bit, kind of this link between, even though they're moving away from this gangster rap with violence, guns, isn't it all just circling back to this anyways, even though we're talking about guns?
So actually, a lot of the songs have references to carrying Glock with them, so like they would flaunt it as part of their identity. So it is still there's still violence involved, even when we're shifting towards scam red as the main source of income, and there's still references to drug use as well. So
Yeah.
it's new in that sense that there's another way of making money, but it's not completely negating some of the themes that you see in the gangster rap from the earlier days, like 80s to 2000s.
Yeah. Well, excellent. So thank you for this amazing presentation. And now, Thomas, we turn to you. I don't know if you have a few slides you'd like to share with us as well.
Sure. Thank you, David. So today I get to talk about victims of offenders of pump and dump schemes. So just to give you a little bit of the nature of where we're going, I want to talk a little bit about why I started this project, kind of where this idea came from. I'm going to give you about a bird's eye view, about as high as possible, some criminological history very briefly, of course, then talk about the methods results. I want to talk about the offenders first and then the victims second, and then put it together in kind of a discussion here towards the end. So this was my motivation, and it was by and large social media, that we've seen a lot of, by and large, influencers or individuals who are famous at some point of time suggesting that people should invest in some type of cryptocurrency. Now, I will mention that some of these are them directly. Some of them say they didn't do their homework. Some of them were in fact hacked. But by and large, there's this really kind of interesting group that is saying, here is the new up and coming cryptocurrency. And if you're familiar with pump and dump schemes, they've been around forever, but they've definitely moved into the cryptocurrency space. They basically look like this graph down here. There is kind of a worthless asset. Colloquially in this space, it's called a shitcoin. But they are these kind of worthless assets, and some influencer, someone who has some type of following, some type of power, suggests that this may be the next kind of currency to rise. As you can see, the value over here, these are fractions of a penny. Typically, whoever the person is kind of hawking this coin is going to control much of it. And so as interest increases, the value increases, even if only slightly. So you can see that it's still worth fractions of a penny, but enough, especially if you have a high volume of it, that's going to increase, say, your profits if you sell off. And then once that kind of influencer or individual who has those kind of large volume, who kind of ran up the currency price, sells off, it tanks once again. And so everybody kind of loses their investment. So I wanted to put this in context of the criminology literature. And really, I just have two things. One is going back hundreds of years, right? We have the classical school who really suggested that crime was a rational problem. And that has kind of gone aside. Most of what we consider now is either in the psych or the soc space. And I was reading an article, and they kind of called it the quasi-deterministic response. And so the idea is there's some type of individual social experience, some type of environment, some type of personality, whatever it is, that is going to affect the likelihood of someone committing a crime. So I like the term concentrated disadvantage. It gets at a whole lot of the social elements. Historically, when we think of things like the Chicago schools, they were largely suggesting that specific environments, usually urban environments, and usually those kind of concentrated in the poor, were those spaces that led to the most crime. And this seemed very juxtaposed in looking at these kind of influencer type of crimes, something like a pump and dump scheme, where you had to have influence, you had to have some type of background. And by and large, I imagine some of these are rather wealthy. And so I wanted to see if this kind of held up, or if we had kind of a traditional approach to crime. So we're using our survey data, and if you haven't heard of our survey data, at Virginia Tech through the Center for Peace Studies, we run kind of a national survey every year. that talks about or asks about cybercrime, cybercrime victimization, cybercrime experiences. It's been running since about 2019, and we have a 2025 wave as of today. So I'll be talking about 3 waves, 2022, 23, and 24. I do have to thank Eric Jardine. He actually gave us part of the survey before he left for Chainalysis. He was going to kind of deploy a cryptocurrency survey. Right as he was leaving, he gave it to me and said, hey, you should deploy some of these questions. So we put it as a module, kind of rotating module in our survey. So it's not collected every time, but it is collected occasionally. Hence why I'm talking about it for about a 3-year span here. So overall, we have just shy of 4,000 participants, but about 400 were dropped due to attention check problems. So a fairly large sample. Now that's needed, and I'll talk about that why here in a minute. First off, we had to get at the question of, did they purchase cryptocurrencies? And first, I just wanted kind of a holistic view of how many people were purchasing these. This was a question that they could have kind of multiple select. So they could say no, but they could also say yes as an investment opportunity and yes as a way to purchase a good or service. Now for the offending question, we left it pretty broad, but we wanted to kind of cue in on the nature of pump and dump schemes, and that is that they are promoting a cryptocurrency in an attempt to increase its value. Now, there's certainly some kind of legal questions around this. This is often in a regulatory space. So we left it fairly nebulous, but likely if they said yes to this, whether it's prosecuted or investigated or not, it's probably under the illegal space. The second is a victimization question, and it basically is, did you lose money to a cryptocurrency scam where you were promised high returns? So this is exactly what you would kind of find with someone who was a victim of these kind of pump and dump schemes. So overall, most people did not purchase cryptocurrency, about 67%, but we did have roughly north of 1,000 people who purchased cryptocurrency. Most of those, as you would imagine, 800 of those did so as an investment. And fortunately for at least this project, those are the group that we're primarily focusing on, those who had purchased cryptocurrency and those who had done so specifically as an investment tool. So the idea here was how this kind of household income was affecting your cryptocurrency experience. The first element was thinking about those kind of influencers. And my question, or if you want to make a hypothesis, just make it a statement, is did higher income households, were they more likely to offend? And then second, were lower income households more likely to be victims? Now this is counter to many of the criminological kind of traditions where we see a lot of offender-victim overlap, that offenders and victims tend to have a tremendous amount of similarities in terms of income, in terms of location, in terms of all sorts of factors. So in this case, we were kind of predicting something opposite. So I have a lot of data, and I'm not going to show you much at all. What I did was I ran a series of logistic regressions and did some kind of predictive models. And so that's what I'm going to show you. There are controls in these logistic regressions. I could kind of assault your screens with all sorts of p-values and things like that. But I just want to get kind of at the core of the investment notion, or sorry, the income notion. So overall, what we see is individuals with higher income were more likely to invest in cryptocurrency. Now that makes sense, right? They're the individuals who have higher disposable income. Now, what about the offending rates? Well, the offending rates was not statistically significant, though it was kind of trending in a direction that we did see slightly higher incomes were more likely to say yes to that offending question. Now, again, this isn't significant, so we're not sure of this. We didn't have a lot of people who said yes to this. You know, of that sample of 3,000 reduced to 800, we ended up with about 100 or so who said yes, they had kind of promoted a cryptocurrency specifically to increase its value. So we didn't have a lot to work with here. You can see that our confidence intervals are very high. But overall, there's a slight trajectory upwards. Now for victimization, we saw the opposite pattern, and this was in fact statistically significant. You saw that individuals with lower incomes were much more likely to experience victimization of cryptocurrency scams than those with higher incomes. So putting this all together, the idea here is that what we're kind of expecting to see that there was these relatively high income earner influencers who were preying largely upon those who were lower income. And now, while we didn't get that total story, we did find that those with lower income certainly had increased rates. A couple of kind of caveats, spoilers, future directions. One, I mentioned that this was part of a larger logistic regression. We certainly had criminological theories in there. We did find strain and self-control were correlated with both offending and victimization, both in the expected directions. Also, we're kind of thinking that there may be some truth to that narrative, that those who are kind of in the more desperate situations are investing in riskier cryptocurrencies. So if you kind of take the first graph and the third graph together, what you see is that even though individuals with lower disposable incomes are less likely to kind of invest in some type of cryptocurrency, it does appear that they, if they do, they're more likely to be victimized. So likely what we're seeing is probably riskier assets. So they're moving away from something like Bitcoin into something kind of these smaller coins. So we are, in fact, examining what coin they are investing in. So this is part of our newest data set, which I did not have time to analyze because actually it's still in the field as of at least an hour ago. We do have some additional controls to look at. Certainly there was some gender differences. Males were substantially more likely to invest, things like that. We want to look at changes over time. We're starting to get enough data to be able to see that. Specifically, we're very interested in how kind of the modern American change in administration, the Trump administration may change this. They have been kind of a more pro-cryptocurrency than any administration before, even the first Trump administration. So there's something new there. You're seeing a lot more kind of positive press around cryptocurrency. And lastly, what we looked at here was just the rate, right? So what was the rate of victimization? This doesn't mean that the amount is a different. So for example, it could be that those with higher incomes are less likely to be victimized, but if they are victimized, they may have more damage, right? They may lose more money than those with lower victimization. So these are things that we're going to continue to examine. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Maybe one question, if you don't mind, that I can ask after your presentation. One of the things that we've also seen is people not necessarily becoming victims of these scams, but actually participating willingly, because we call these snipers. You kind of that this is going to be a meme coin or a shit coin. The value is going to go up very quickly. You also know it's going to go down very quickly. But if you time your purchase just right, you can actually just make a lot of money. And back in the 2000s, there was this research paper that was really interesting where the researchers from Microsoft collected all this spam and they tried to see when was the spam promoting a certain stock, and they would try and get early into the scam, buy the stock, watch it go up, and then when it was the spam campaign was dying, they could actually sell the stock and make a profit. And they were wondering, maybe some people are not all victims. They're actually just trying to time it right. And some people time it right, some people don't. And so if we're seeing these huge pump and dumps, they're not working because people are stupid, dumb, get manipulated, but they're actually working because people are trying to bet some money into this thing and try to make some money. Do you have a sense for kind of this this trend and how it could? Is this part of your survey? Should this be part of your survey? Do you have a sense for kind of how to integrate this into what you just presented?
Yeah, so there's a couple thoughts here. One, there are some questions around that. The data is pretty limited because it's not asked every year, and this pool gets kind of small once we scale down to this level of victims. But I do see that this is an advantage of surveys, and often we don't see a ton of advantages of asking people questions. It's we have these graphs, you can see those rates, you can see when something's a pump and dump. It's pretty obvious, and many people know that. But when we specifically ask them about their victimization experience, right? If they're going to play the game of sniper, many of them are going to recognize that they may lose, right? They may win, but they may lose, and so they may not actually report that as like, "Hey, I wasn't a victim. I just, I screwed
Yeah,
up.
that's wrong. Yeah.
So I think this is one of the advantages of putting some of those scales together. So once we have other methods of, or once we use other methods to consider investment decisions and things like that, asking them whether they're a victim may get some of that information.
Yeah. And I would be really curious to know what proportion are there like real victims versus people who are just playing the game, and they probably made some money. Now, even if they lost a bit of money, they bought some early on, and then so it would be really interesting to see, like, is this really a problem or is this just people having fun, basically? I'd be really interested in hearing the answer to this question. Hopefully you get to solve that and present it at future ESC, hopefully.
Thanks, David.
Last but not least, Cassandra Dodge. I'm not sure, have you fixed your slide problem? You think you have?
I believe so, so please let me know if that is an issue.
Perfect. Well, I'll let you start and then we'll chat afterwards.
All right. So, good afternoon. My name is Cassandra Dodge. I am faculty over at Indiana State University, and my presentation today is effective cybersecurity practices, fostering user confidence and action. And so this one is not, caveat to say that this is looking at prior research that I have completed and published on, but trying to look at it from a different direction for future implications and potential evaluations of different policy in order to improve cybersecurity practice. And so in that, it should go without saying, but I'll say it anyways, that human users are a linchpin in the success of any cybersecurity practice in any network and computer system. Coming from a report from Verizon that employees working from home are particularly vulnerable to attacks. So focusing prevention efforts in the area of those end users is probably going to be more fruitful and honestly, potentially cheaper than it is in order to continuously target harden the network in its entirety. Now, as end users, while not necessarily educated in the nuances of network security and computer security, most users are aware that threats do exist. And if we know that there is a threat and we know what we're supposed to do, why aren't we taking action in order to protect ourselves? And from that policy perspective, how do you convince those end users? Because they have the knowledge, supposedly. Why is it that they're not doing it? And what can we do to push them in that direction? And so the angle that my prior research looked at and used was the concept of protection motivation theory. This is actually a public health theory that was developed in the mid-1970s by R.W. Rogers. And it sought to explain why individuals adopt or engage in protective behaviors or not. This has been in public health communication research, but it has been applied to a variety of different self-protective behavior, including cybersecurity. Ultimately, if you wanted to boil it down to its finest parts, this is a theory of persuasion. How do we convince people to act in a way that is to the best interests of the greater group as well as themselves? And so I prefer using diagrams in order to explain this because there are many different moving parts. And so conceptually, protection motivation theory starts with what is called a fear appeal. It is a message coming from the powers that be. In the case of cybersecurity, this would be from your organization or your cybersecurity professionals to the end user. And in that message, there's a communication of a threat as well as a communication of potential factors that can be done in activities that can be done in order to protect oneself from that threat. Once that is communicated according to PMT, you have several different components that the mechanisms start turning. And this includes the initial threat appraisal by that user. So do they perceive the threat as actually severe? Do they perceive themselves as vulnerable to that threat? And also in their response appraisal, so self-evaluation of, do they believe that the response that they've been asked to do will actually work? Do they believe that they are capable of it? And do they feel that this is going to, cost them anything or have any kind of motivation that pushes in that other direction, that this would take too much time or I don't feel like it? And so you have these different components as well as an emotional response of fear in response to that threat that push towards that motivation, either pushing it in more likely that she will conform or in the vice versa. Once you have that intention, intentions then inform, do you actually take action? And so in the research that I conducted with several of my peers, we looked at the key PMT variables, including the rewards, which is normally left out of the model, and used an experimental vignette and survey design on a nationally reflective sample of 719 people. And so with that, we were trying to answer if these different elements and which of these elements predict the adherence to that intention towards cybersecurity protection, net of other considerations. And so again, the variables that we used included an experimental component. So individuals were given a vignette scenario, and we varied the severity of the threat that was being communicated, the communication of that vulnerability for the users, and their response costs. The other PMT variables of fear, self-efficacy, rewards, and response efficacy, those were inherent and a part of those users. They were asked standard survey scales in order to measure those concepts. And then ultimately they were asked, after reading the vignette, being assigned their different versions of the threat and response costs, what was their likelihood that they would follow the recommendation that was in the message? And so when we looked at that, we found that yes, the communication of those threat, vulnerability, and severity in the message, they did matter. But what I'm going to focus more so on here in this discussion are the non-manipulated variables of self-efficacy and response efficacy. So in both of these cases, being some of the strongest predictors of behavior were how did our respondent feel about their own ability to actually do what they were being asked to do, and were they confident that it would even make a difference? And the reason why I'm focusing on that here is because when we actually look at self-efficacy in other cybersecurity research that have looked at protection motivation variables, self-efficacy is consistently identified as one of the main predictors, if not the strongest predictor of that motivation. So when we look at this from a policy perspective, what can we do as in the field of cybersecurity? What can we do to improve that end user's confidence in their ability to actually take security actions? So one of the things that we may need to consider is, what are the actions we're asking them to take? Are they particularly complicated? Is there any way for us to simplify this, make it a click of a button, as opposed to any multiple step processes that maybe somebody who is more tech savvy would be familiar with? And so in streamlining those different tasks, whatever we're asking them to do in that message, if it is a very simple, click on one button and it automatically reports a phishing attack, as opposed to having to email OIT, forwarding them the item, you get the idea. Also, we've seen some attempts to gamify the training of cybersecurity. So in making it, in these different training scenarios, making it that it is fun to learn how to do these tasks. Once that becomes sort of muscle memory in that gamification, when it's applied to the real world, maybe individuals will be able to just fall back on that muscle memory in that moment. Now, the response efficacy component, I think that sometimes our own success can actually backfire on us in this particular case. So when we're talking about response efficacy, what I'm meaning is we need to improve the perceptions and the confidence that those protection responses are effective. When we talk about, an attack, we know when an attack occurred because it succeeded. We are told because we're trying to respond now to the loss of data. So if it's working well, if these different taskings, these different steps that you're asking your users to do are actually functioning as intended, then they would never know that they're working. We don't find out until something bad happens. It's sort of a form of survival bias that an individual may be like, well, why am I going to do what you told me to do? It's not going to make a difference anyways. When they don't realize that it is in fact making a difference, we just don't like to tell people when, things are good, when things, when an attack has been avoided. And so I would suggest in that vein that maybe there needs to be more transparency about the attempts of attacks and different scams or whatever the case may be of those cybersecurity violations, that your end users as part of your ecosystem need to be a bit more aware that yes, attempts have been made. I know we don't like to admit that we are a target, but by admitting it and saying, hey, it could have happened, but it didn't because you guys did good, that may again increase that response efficacy and that confidence that you are doing the right thing. Therefore, you'll continue to do the right thing. In that same vein, there should be some credit towards those end users for that proactive behavior. Something other than your email has been received, maybe be a bit more upfront saying, hey, you did a good job. This could have been very bad, and you did exactly what you were supposed to. Kudos to you. A gold star, maybe just a gold star, but at least, again, it communicates that what individuals are doing, the time that they are taking out of their normal routine in order to do as they were told, does have positive outcomes, and they just need to know about those outcomes. And in that, it also illustrates the reality of that current attack landscape. And again, how well are their efforts in trying to avoid that are working. So in that vein, I'm not going to go too much further in depth into the rest of the study, though it is published. I am happy to share that with anybody if they are interested. Feel free to reach out to me personally, and I will make sure that you can get the full write-up.
Thank you, Cassandra. In a moment, we'll be going kind of live with the whole group and kind of have a group discussion. But maybe before we get there, I'll just ask you a very cute question. Maybe you want to end your sharing your desktop. I like the squirrel, but
oh, I did not realize that was still sharing. I am so sorry. That's ridiculous. Sorry about that.
We all love a good animal picture. But I feel as though in many companies there's this kind of the IT and this feeling is that we are secure. We could be attacked at any time, and then there's going to be a breach, and then we'll have to do some incident response, and we'll have to answer to that. Whereas I feel as though pretty much all organizations are hacked all the time. And so it's not as if we are in a secure state and then we might fall into this insecure state. We're pretty much always in the insecure state. And the way that we communicate with the employees is to say, try and prevent further, future breaches, yes, but also just know that we are penetrated and you're walking around the grounds and there are ninjas and people hidden everywhere and you need to find them. It's not, maybe they're there, maybe they're not. There is someone out there, that's for sure. So do you feel as though kind of the way that we communicate right now, where we have this like, we're secure, don't make us become insecure, is that kind of the way to go? Do we fall too much into fear if we tell people we're hacked all the time. So do you have a comment or appreciation for this?
So I think that there is a happy medium to be, found in this space of, yes, we are in an environment that this is all, any corporation, any kind of network, we're all, it's constant.
Yeah.
And so in that, though, it does not mean that there aren't, how should I put this? That there's nothing you can do either. That there isn't a possibility that things could be that much, further down the line. Yes, you have individuals that literally they're paid to be part of that team in order to prevent and also provide incident response. But having the knowledge, again, because you don't hear about it every day, you actually just become complacent. You think that, they may not be like, no, we never said that we were completely secure.
Yeah.
But because you're never told that you're not, that you just think you are.
Yeah.
And so it's that, happy medium of ensuring individuals are, just doing the everyday practices that would be, that should go without saying, should be second nature, but people become complacent. And so sometimes I think that, we need a little bit of a reminder to not take these things for granted, but then also as the IT professionals and the cybersecurity professionals understand that many people, even and this is now I'm just bringing in, my own experiences with students, but in my own experience, I've noticed that, your Generation Z group actually is not as tech savvy as, I would have thought, like, had I not, interacted with them more directly, because they were, growing up in app generation. It was point and click. So not, something that may read as a big old red flag to me because I had to go in because I was that, nerd of a kid who liked HTML code. I know it's actually like a bit more, appropriate or normal, and what red flags are happening, they may not even realize, and they may not have the more detailed skill set in order to, you tell them, oh, go, to this, that, and the other on whatever settings you need to change, whatever the case may be, and look at you like you're speaking Greek. And so I think that sometimes we need to take that into consideration too, of do not anticipate the person has the skill set to follow that tasking. And so I think that there's a little bit of push and pull on this. There's no perfect answer, but it's another way forward.
Just a funny anecdote with one of my students that front, where I was asking my students, how do they manage their passwords? Kind of an important thing. And many people just said, well, I have one password for everything, so that's kind of easy. But then there was one who stood out who said, well, I actually don't remember any of my password. Whenever I log into something, I just click the forgotten password and I get a new link, and then I just type in anything. And so whenever I want to log into something, I just reset my password every time. So I thought that was kind of smart, because you do have a different password for every service you log in, but then you have to rely on getting that password reset email. So, people
And that
will
would
always...
I'm always worried, though, because it's like, yes, now your provider just assumes you always do this. And so when somebody does manage to, say hack your email account, they now, like, oh, forgotten passwords. Like, oh yeah, no, they're just logging in again. It's like, yeah, by the way, no. So I'm like, I mean, it's better than using the same password every time, but then, again, anecdotally, of the number of my students who have logged into their, OneDrive on the host computer in the computer lab and don't log out of it afterwards. And I'm like, you do realize that another one of your peers might be on this computer later and can go delete everything in your OneDrive, right? What? Yeah. So it's things that I take for granted. I think this should be normal cybersecurity practice. I forget now that we're in an age that we're kind of seeing that bell curve of experience.
Yeah.
And so that's something also to keep in mind as these same individuals are going into these businesses and into these markets.
So we don't have much time for a discussion, but there's kind of a few points I'd like to just ask everyone here, because we have some very talented researchers. And the first one would be regarding, what do we do with technologies that are creating problems for us? So I'm kind of the dark web guy. I've done a lot of research on the Tor network and the dark web. And a lot of people say, well, we should just ban the Tor network. Why is it allowed to be there? Because, people are buying drugs, and they're buying, they're hiring contract killers with it. And I always say that, technologies can be good or bad, and there's really no reason to ban any technology just because, they empower us, they bring us something that's very valuable. And just to say that the technology should be banned, I think is pretty much always the wrong idea. Now we get to cryptocurrencies. And this is where I think the question becomes even more interesting, because looking back at the last 10 years of cybercrime, I don't think we could have cybercrime as big of a problem as it is today without cryptocurrencies. That's how people buy and sell illicit goods and services. That's how people launder their money. Cryptocurrency is probably at the heart of most cybercrime out there. And what have we gained by having, these cryptocurrencies? It is easier in some cases to do international transactions. For example, my uncle was a pharmaceutical representative, and he would sell pills to Africa. And they had a lot of problems with stolen funds. And so they would have to wait 2 or 3 months before they actually shipped the pills to Africa, because they had so many problems with the bank transfers and the banks calling them and saying, we are clawing back this payment. With cryptocurrencies, it's amazing, because as soon as you got the money, the pills can be on a plane that afternoon, because the money is never going back. So we have this small benefit for this kind of edge case, but cryptocurrencies, with the pump and dump that we've heard, with all the problems with money laundering, fast dating, do you feel as though cryptocurrencies, and I'm trying to be provocative here, do you feel like cryptocurrencies are perhaps the exception to the rule, that all new technologies are inherently useful and that we should keep them? Or are cryptocurrencies so bad that we should actually just ban them? I don't know who wants to. Thomas, if you want to play this one first.
Sure, I'll jump in. So there are some theoretical advantages to cryptocurrency that are largely unrealized, as you mentioned. Things like cross-national ease and elements, and there have been some positive use cases, things like easily getting funding to Ukraine, for example, and so potentially there are some advantages. We just haven't seen them manifest in the way that they could have. Having said that, I imagine that most banking features at some point in time were kind of theoretical advantages. Almost every banking tool has been used for money laundering. So I'm not sure I'm at the ban it stage. I'm certainly at the I don't see it stage. For almost every crime, right, the financial element and things like money laundering, things like pulling the profits out, tend to involve some type of financial tool. And it just seems like cryptocurrency has made that easier, though still not perfect for them.
Cassandra, you wanted to add something on this?
So when you talk about, again, the motivation for creating in the first place, of the lack of trust in, because these are not typically any kind of supported by any government bank system. Like, these are, I've always sort of referred to them that they're more analogous to stocks, that we trust that it has value because people trust that they have value, as opposed to being backed up by any kind of currency system. And so in the vein that people have that distrust of some of those, government based financial systems, I can see where there'd be a draw there and why there was a call for it of a variety. But as for its actual everyday utility, that when you do that pros cons, I don't necessarily believe that the pros outweigh the cons. However, I also am firmly in the stance that the horse is left to the barn, it's not going back in. So we can be, like, hey, ban it all day. That too late, too little, too late, at least in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I don't know you think if you have a comment on this, but cryptocurrencies exist just because we let it exist. I mean, the day that we stop most financial institutions in the Western countries interacting with the exchanges and blocking kind of the flows, it becomes very difficult for people to use it. So I don't think we can actually ban Bitcoins, but we can actually make it very difficult to convert Bitcoin into anything else. And there's going to be some countries, but it's always a question of who's going to be the most organized, who's going to be kind of dedicated to this task. And is it the people who want to convert their Bitcoin to US dollars, or is it people who don't want the Bitcoins to be converted into US dollars? So I think could be done, but it would not be easy. So you think, did you have a comment on this?
I think I'm the believer of there's always going to be bad and good users in any technology, any platform. So I think at this point we haven't seen as many positive or positive use case of cryptos because I think Cassandra mentioned a good point, like distrust, there's not a regulatory system in place. And then I think there's also just a lack of knowledge of how cryptocurrency work by the general public as well. So that kind of, I think, is feeding into the distrust perhaps of using that or realizing some of the positive use case. So as time goes by, I'm assuming the positive use case will become more common, maybe not necessarily in certain country or in the United States, but in other countries around the world.
So I had another big question, and we'll see if we can get a short answer for everyone on this one. But it's about OSINT. And so, Yiting, you used rap lyrics to kind of understand fraud and just, skimming and everything. And I'm always wondering kind of, are we making a huge mistake by using open source intelligence for our research? I tell the story in my OSINT because I teach OSINT. So once again, playing devil's advocate here. But I tell the story about the mayonnaise grandpa. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but he was huge on Reddit. And basically was this guy who made up that he was this retired producer of mayonnaise in Vermont. And he had this business. He was doing this like, just like boutique mayonnaise. And he did this AMA and everyone asked him questions. And he became like somewhat famous around Reddit. And he was this old grandpa that everyone liked. And it was all made up. It was completely a whole story. And he only did it kind of for the fame, the attention. And he didn't think it would pan into anything. And then turns out that everyone liked him. So he kind of was stuck playing the grandpa mayonnaise role. And I'm always wondering kind of how many of these grandpa mayonnaise are we studying? And do people kind of know that, people are going to read this? And if they do, they're going to kind of shape their message. It's all kind of a big theater, kind of as what you said. And so in a minute, anyone's going to take on OSINT, theater, and do we put too much faith into this thing? Cassandra?
So I think that, there's a throwing the baby out with the bathwater situation I think that there is a lot of utility in looking at open source data for the purposes of research. However, in that same vein, it is also for us as researchers to maybe use the same OSINT techniques in order to verify that the person or the individual that we are including in our data set, that this is actually legitimate information, that this is a legitimate person, like, and actually going in and checking to see, because if you'd gone, to use grandpa mayonnaise, being like, okay, let's go do, let's go fact check and see, and they probably very quickly would realize this is all, as you said, it's theater. It's entertainment, and so don't take it seriously. And so I think that if you're, in order to maintain that research integrity, if you're going to be using that open source material, it is on us also to use that same, same methods to verify whether or not they're legitimate to be included in any of our data.
Very wise words. You think that you want to add?
Yeah, and I was going to say, because there's still values in studying this, because if it's gone viral, when enough people believe it is true, sometimes society or community will start thinking that it's true, and to a degree, there's values in studying that phenomenon and the impact that it has on the community.
Excellent. So I want to take the last few seconds just to remind everyone they were all part of the Division of Cybercrime of the American Society of Criminology. If you're interested by these topics, please do reach out to us, join the division, become a member, and engage with us. Cybercrime research is fun, as you've seen today, and we'll try and continue to keep it fun. So thank you for listening. This was a pleasure. Thank you with Michael, Manon, and all the team for inviting us for this round, and we look forward to participating again hopefully next year. Goodbye, everyone.